you're going to find out more and more that people live their lives by an illusion, by things that are not real. They will discount their blessings to complain about one thing. The Lord made us different than that. Very different. And if you're thankful over things, when you're thankful for things in your life, do you know what happens when you do that? When you thank God for things in your life, you're confirming your Father's existence and his work in your life. And when you confirm it, the Lord begins to step in and do things like rebuke the devourer. He does. When we obey the Lord, like giving tithes, right? I had a discussion one time about the tithe and why the Lord would rebuke the devourer for your sakes. It's not because of the amount of money. It's because you have committed to do something by faith in obedience to the Lord. And when you give with a cheerful heart in obedience to the Lord, right, then he will do that. He will do that. So it has nothing. It could be a penny. It could be a sack of potatoes. It could be a piece of a can of canned food. That could be your tithe. Your tithe could be it could be a loaf of bread, a box of nails. It literally can be anything. But when you do that, when you give with a cheerful heart, in obedience to the Lord, a Lord that you have not seen, you're doing it by faith, and that pleases God. You become an obedient son. You're named an obedient son in that, or son or daughter, in that moment. You're in obedience. And because today is a day of salvation, and because tomorrow is promised to no one, all the promises that the Lord has for you is not for tomorrow. Because we're not promised tomorrow. Therefore, the Lord stands ready to fulfill in your life every word he spoke over you. And the conditions he gave you, he's ready to deliver right now today. I'm telling you a fact. That's a fact. We're not talking about tomorrow. We're not talking about the future. We're talking about right now. In the Word of God, everything is prophecy. Because God speaks like this. He says, if you do this, I'll do this. And if you don't do this, this will happen to you. That's the way the Lord speaks. Well, when we begin to comply with that word, whatever the Lord has for you, he has today. Listen, it's the same God that said tomorrow's promised to no man. We're not promised tomorrow. And if you're not promised tomorrow, the Lord's not going to fulfill something for you tomorrow. He'll do it today. And why am I talking like this? Because you're in the middle of a war. And everything the Lord has for you, it's time for you to get it, to put it on, and to go forward by faith against this darkness that's rising everywhere. Did you guys hear about the gentleman who beheaded his girlfriend in the car yesterday? Driving, how do you drive down a highway and chop the head of the one in the car, chop her head off? How do you do that? That was in Minnesota, I believe it was, wasn't it? Indianapolis or somewhere around there, wasn't it? Chop the head off the individual, the woman. What kind of a world is, and this happens every single weekend, something like that is happening. We're talking about beyond shooting. We're talking about some things that just nobody should do. We're close. We're getting so close to a point, a breakout point. I'm telling you guys, when it starts, it's going to be panic, and you don't understand how close you are. I recently received an email, and if that person is listening, then listen up closely. And they were talking about the binary system. So again, if that person is listening, listen closely. The heart of these individuals is true. They're really using all their efforts to do something. So what I did was, I wanted to make sure that I could give them something that is in the clear, right? So I kind of pulled some strings and had something taken out of the realm of, was kind of like secrecy, to get it prepared to give to them. Because with a heart like they have, they're hunting down, they want to know, and they're trying to warn people about the secondary effects from an inbound star system, and they really want to know this. And I know that if they had certain coordinates, they could actually take their equipment and spot some of the more factual things out there to have better estimates so that they can be equipped to give an accurate forecast of things that are happening on the earth, because they will escalate beyond your imagination. They will escalate big time. There are some folks that are talking about these spiritual things, and it's not clear to everybody exactly, what I do or what I have not done, or whatever the case is. It's not that clear to everybody, but when it comes to spiritual things, or let's just say extraordinary things, there are certain fields a person can be recruited into. And they have some missing elements in their narrative that if they had it, when their heart is right for the people, it's good to give folks like that these things, because some of these folks are seasoned. Everybody goes through phases. At first, they say, hey, I can make money off this, right? That's just being real with you. That's what they say. I can make money off this. Well, if I do this, I can survive, and everybody wins, and they get educated, and I can retire, something like that. But there comes a point in everybody's life when all the speculation begins to manifest. And when it manifests, those who are true out there, the only thing they're concerned about is that people be equipped to be aware of what's coming. It's like a forecast of a bad thunderstorm with tornadoes in it. That's what they become concerned about. To equip people with the right information so that, number one, they're not so shocked that they give into any evil thing just for protection. And that happens a lot. That they're educated about it and begin to fight the forces now. And that's what it's quickly turning into. Because in truth, if everybody out there were to learn about the nature of the giants and the nature of what people are calling these extraterrestrial life forms, they would fight now. In fact, your life would begin to change because you would begin to recognize their influence upon your life right now. I tell you, anything that happened outside of righteousness was not given to you by your Father in heaven, but was encouraged by elements in the world. And those elements in the world are very difficult to see. It's very difficult to see what that thing is or what those things are. But once you identify them, you're free of them. It's like being in a forest and you hear footsteps, but you don't know what they are. You don't know if it's a bear. You don't know what it is. You panic because you cannot see. Your imagination runs wild. You have high states of fear. And if you had a weapon, you'll shoot at everything that makes a noise. You can do damage that way. As soon as you identify what's making those footprints, then you will not shoot at everything, nor will you hear a noise and say it's a monster or it's this, that, or the other. Because once you know, then your hearing is fine-tuned. If it's a bear, there's certain things you'll listen for. If it's a person, there's certain things you'll listen for. And it's all different. So once you're equipped with the information, your walk is a lot more fine-tuned in the earth. And you can be free of an element that causes most people fear. You can be as stable as iron in the middle of very shaky terrain if you understand your environment around you. And to understand your environment now means you have to understand the heavens. You must understand those elements that are in the earth that are real. You can't live your life with blinders on and say, hey, I was faced with everything and I made it. No, you were not faced with everything, but you will be, because the Lord wasn't playing when he said this one statement. Even the name devil and Satan implies that the greater the word is in you, the more you're going to see. Do you know that? And the more you see, for anybody, when they begin to see, they do not boast. They stop boasting. There's no more bragging, because they understand they can see both that thing and consequences. So there's a lot to consider, right? But once you see in this case, you'll also see their influence upon others. You'll no longer blame the person, but you'll be able to identify the force behind the person's behavior. And you'll become a soldier in this war. Not killing people, not causing further injuries to people, but to eject the spirits that influence the people, arming the people with what they need to be armed with. Some people, you can make a small statement and change many things in their lives. You can identify things. I meet a lot of people, and I've met a lot of people who've had small issues in their homes, but they lived in a living hell for years. You tell them to make a small adjustment, an adjustment so easy, so simple, and then when they do, they're free of what was oppressing them. Small adjustments. Why? Because you can identify the force behind it. The Lord will give you the information on what you see, because whatever you see, you then have to deal with. And your Father will not have you in the blind concerning their capabilities, what they can and cannot do. He will always disclose to you that things remain in balance. You'll never be left without proper gear to handle whatever you face. The Lord will never do that. Never. That means if you're blind, you can only face so much. And a lot of people want to know things, right? The more you know, the more you're going to recognize in the world. The more things you recognize, the more you're going to have to deal with. So listen to me carefully. Please don't go gather information to feed your fantasy or something like that, but understand something. Once you identify it, once you see it, it will forever be a part of your environment. You will have to be armed with how to defeat it, how to overcome it, and to continue to live your life, to carry the gospel, and to make changes in this world. Darkness is not to overtake your area. It is not to overtake your area. Some of you, we're going to have massive storms here shortly. Some of you, the only reason your neighborhood's going to be spared is because you're in it. That's the only reason. But when the saints begin to be few in number on the face of the earth, I can tell you right now, there is no hope for those who will live in that type of environment where the saints are not. God does not spare people, right? Just to spare people. But he does what he does because he fulfills his word upon his children. And some of his children are in a hard-headed state right now. But some of his children are addicted to drugs, and some are alcoholics. But they're still his children. Some have not said yes to Christ, but they are still his children. And I'm telling you, wherever they are, that place is spared because of them. So things are being held back. When you see in the heavens what you're about to see, you're not going to have a question anymore. But fear, if you're not careful, fear is going to take you over. War will most certainly break out in a visible way. In a visible way. Most certainly. It's going to scare a lot of people. And if you're not careful, you're going to resort back to those information centers that are secular, that have nothing to do with holiness. In fact, for some of you, I have a small challenge. You don't have to commit to it. It's just a challenge. Because sometimes we say things, but do we really believe it? For example, how many of you understand that the Lord's not going to have you ignorant concerning the devices of the enemy? How many of you know that? You've heard that before. You've read the scripture, but how many of you know that? Because my next piece of advice is this. Many of you have secular knowledge, scientific knowledge. You're about to face some shortcomings in physics, just like they are at CERN. See, at CERN, they have no answer for a few things. Things are not matching up. Some of the predictive models were so far off, it's not even funny. They don't know why mathematically, which is why the word quantum kind of takes its place, because you can weave in and out of explanations, right? And with some very trickery web work, you can hope to define just about everything by not defining it at all. Weird phenomena is happening at CERN. On one experiment, the sky turned a pinkish color. I believe that everybody thought it was a front that was coming through. There was no front. Cloud formations happened over that area twice, out of the blue, out of nowhere, which is a result of a high proton count. Like cloud seeding without the seeds, right? When the collision device failed, protons were shot all out into the air, took a plane down. That was confirmed to be a set of protons, because CERN is essentially a particle beam weapon, a very powerful particle beam weapon. But you could say they have a glove for that weapon, right? So they can catch the particles. But it's still a particle beam weapon. Oh, and by the way, if you can build a CERN underneath the ground, you can have a small version the size of a desk that can fire into space for many miles, very fast. That's how big of a particle weapon it would take. It wouldn't take what the length of tubing that CERN has. It wouldn't take that. It would take a burst explosion to forward those protons by way of super magnetics to get like a rail gun without the gun itself, but a magnetic pathway that connects to the magnetosphere. So the protons will be guided in whatever direction you see fit. Those already exist. That's part of the co-op between America, Israel, France, and some other countries. CERN is being paid. CERN is bought and paid for by such things. It's kind of like some of the when you see a big collaborative experiment like the International Space Station, weaponry pays for this. But who's getting these weapons? They're going all over the place. Because now they don't so much do arms deals as they send somebody a computer packet, meaning a file, and this file has the how-to instructions on how to replicate certain experiments. That's what they do. They don't have to go and make the thing. They give the people the data, which contains the numbers, the temperatures, the speeds, right? What the settings for things, how to reproduce specific things, and that's what they do. Like laser weapons. We've already, as of this month, last month, the month before, positioned some of the new laser weapons all throughout the world. And so has China. Because we're dealing with hypersonic missiles now. We have a hypersonic missile threat. Well, do you guys know that America and Israel has no ability to intercept a hypersonic missile? Patriot systems will not engage a hypersonic missile. It is too slow. It launches at Mach 2.5. That's way in the measure for something like a hypersonic weapon. Russia, Iran, and China have successful hypersonic weapons. They have successfully tested them over and over again. They have them, which means Russia can reach the U.S. in a matter of minutes with a very large payload. We don't have that capability yet. Ours disintegrated, right? We certainly don't have a defense capability for them. And they don't need one because they're the only ones that have them. So we're working on lasers, very powerful lasers. I mean, extremely powerful lasers. Which is why Iron Dome, the Patriot systems, right? Just like when they got rid of the Hawk systems, all those air defense systems were exchanged. Well, it's happening again. Some of the units of the Patriot systems are rotating. But the new defense laser systems are going to take the place of many lasers, right? The technology is out there. Civilians use what? CO2 lasers. That's very close to some of the high beam focus lasers they have. A CO2 laser is quite effective. They use those for cutting all the time, right? Cutting through very thick material and very efficient speeds. But there's something that's about, I'd say about 1,000 times more powerful. And the most powerful CO2 weapon is what they're working on. And I can tell you this, once they reach that capability, there's always an inherent issue with lasers. Do you guys know what that is? Lasers not only can go through the target, heat the target up and explode it, whatever the case is, but it can also keep going. That's an effective particle beam. It'll keep going. It'll keep going right up into space. So when you fire a laser in the air, you have to really be careful. You have to have a grid where the satellites are. You cannot aim where you hit the satellites. So their system would have to not only navigate between satellites and not, intersect one, but it will have to take that into an account for a triangulation of hitting the target. That's what they're working on. And when they get this done, that will unleash the capabilities of many different systems that are out there right now. Listen, it works like this. Once everything they do, right, they just simply upload the new parameters to some of the platforms that are flying over your head, some of the platforms that are out to sea, and now they have those capabilities. The equipment, the pieces, they're already in place. How to calibrate the system is the missing element. The power's in place, right? The beam reflectors and everything, all that's in place. What's missing are the parameters. For example, what frequency do you want that light to generate, right? What frequency? At what precise voltage will light have a specific effect, right? At what, you can do something called a nullified frequency. At what nullified frequency, which is about 5 or 6 frequencies all hitting out at one time. But the purpose is that one wave nullify another, causing a whole different type of, well, let's just say light wave, right? So with those parameters, they'll be able to increase the distance by hundreds of miles, thousands of miles, only by adjusting the parameters. Everything is motorized now, so parameter adjustment's easy. We're very close. I'd say we're about maybe a month off from completion of that. I'm sorry, maybe 2 months off completion from that. Now, you know that Russia is right there in the vicinity, which is why they have increased their operations, both in the Middle East and in cooperation with China. That's why they're showing up in certain areas to our south, because they're taking the facilities that could be used as, soft launch points for us. Russia does not want to take the U.S. Russia desires to dominate. That's exactly what they'll do. They don't want Western philosophy all over the place. That's not what they want. Because look at our system. Take a good look at our system. If you were a foreigner and you looked at the U.S. government, what would you think? Same way many of you think that Russia's this run-down place with a bunch of people that want to chop your head off. The same way you have been, they've shown propaganda to instill that mindset into your head. Well, I'll tell you something. The U.S. can be seen in a different light through propaganda shown by Russia to their people. A long time ago, I told you guys, America's going to be distracted or consumed within itself. You remember that? Because in prophecy, because America's Israel's ally, in prophecy, how in the world can somebody go in and trample Jerusalem underfoot 3.5 years and nobody do anything about it? That's not going to happen with the USA around. It will not happen. Nobody with the USA around, and when we're capable, is going to go into Israel and take over Jerusalem. That's just not going to happen. It won't happen. The question is, what happened to the USA? That we would not defend Israel's rights, right? Humanitarian rights and everything else. How can those Bible prophecies come to pass? For what it says in the Bible, if the USA is fully intact. And we talked about this. How many years ago did we talk about this? It'll take one of you dusty ones to bring it back up because, in fact, when I first met Angela, that was one of the first things I told her. A time of lawlessness. And it's because of an individual had a dream, and I was explaining that dream to him. He said he had a gun. Bullets were everywhere. But the bullets weren't working. And I told the individual, I said, because what we're about to go through, you cannot fight with bullets, nor can you defend with bullets. It's going to be very different. It'll be useless. All of what man thought he would defend himself with is going to be useless. So you'll find that stuff everywhere. And it won't do you any good for what's coming. Then I told him Jerusalem would be trampled underfoot. And the USA is going to have its hands tied internally, folded in upon itself, an internal struggle so incredibly deep that it touches most people. Lawlessness would ensue. People would be running around doing just about anything they wanted to do because they would let go of policing up this nation, right? Of any type of enforcement, that will be gone because the people wouldn't have it. We talked about that subject, and here we are. Here we are, ladies and gentlemen. People want to defund the police, and crime is spiking all over the place. Defunding the police won't work, but they're going to continue with some of these ideologies. They're releasing hardened criminals back into the streets, trying to talk everything out with them, right? Some of these people have gone back to jail 3 and 4 times. And they're trying to talk with the people. Oh, and by the way, you won't go to jail these days for something that's not murder because they don't want to sing you into the prisons. They don't want to do that. They'll sing you home, and people know that. So what we're facing here is the USA dismantling itself from the inside out by way of the people and the government. And you can't blame it all on the government, right? Because they're but men. The people are demanding that they do these things. The government, they're not going to do anything if the people won't. If all the people stood up and said, nope, we're not doing this. We're not going to do this. Well, then guess what? It wouldn't happen. But so long as they have the people tricked into believing that they have no voice, that they can't make any changes, that the government knows best, these changes are going to take effect. And they do it in a way that really makes a person believe that they have no effect on the outcome of what's happening in government. That's wrong. What if everybody woke up one day and said, well, we're not playing the government thing this day. Nobody went to work. Nobody went shopping. Nobody did anything. I can guarantee you that they would change everything in government then. The act would be over. But unfortunately, they've convinced the people that they're the people's power. And the people bought it hook, line, and sinker. You see, I'm going to tell you something you may not know, a strategy that's used often. Have you noticed the changes that happen right after a new president is elected? Have you guys noticed? Now, we're not talking about some of the great achievements either. Nope, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a change in humanity takes place. every single time a new president is elected. Have you guys noticed that? That humanity changes. And do you know why? Every single time a president is elected, here's what happens. During the election season, a long time ago, they found it important to have everybody engaged. They needed everybody to feel like they were part of the system. Elections took place so that people could, do what they got to do, and they would support one person or the other. Well, back then, when the government was more like, like a third-party type deal, they wrote up, I believe it was, wasn't it Chase? The guy that the Chase family, Chase Bank family, some of the oil tycoons and everybody else, they got together and they wrote up a type of theory, right? They had economists and you name it. They had a slew of disciplines there. And in fact, this happened right after the government borrowed money. You guys remember that? When the government borrowed money. Right after that, they came up with these protocols. And they determined that just like Rome, the people had to stay engaged. So they keep people engaged by way of these promises. And they tell you things like, we won't survive if we don't have this guy in office, or we won't survive if we don't have the other guy in office. They do this every single election year. They say the exact same things. And it shocks me that people can't notice this. It's like we can't see. We get so overwhelmed by the emotional state of people and this ideology of what could happen to the country if the wrong guy is picked. We forget. But it's like a revolving door. It's the same thing over and over again. I mean, over and over again. And while people are engaged in that fully, right, some of the decisions made in the White House are made to keep people engaged even further. Even the consequences are formulated as a penalty to keep people engaged. Oh, they're doing it to the letter. And people follow it to the letter. They love to have it so. They love to have it so. Because of that, right? All these new things are taking place because the people demand it, not even knowing that somebody planted the seed to cause the public to demand it. Do you guys know that? In other words, they induced an emotional state upon the people. The people requested something to mitigate that emotional state. How many people are being shot this week? Lots have been shot this week, right? You don't hear, where's the news at? Nobody's protesting these shootings. See, when people shoot each other, that's no big deal, evidently. But if a police officer shoots a person, right? And you got good people and bad people, but I'm telling you what they're doing. They focus in on these small specific things so that people will only rebel if a person that fits the category of the disliked individual they showed on television does it. But if the people kill the people, it's okay. So in this case, you have a lot of crime of people brutally assaulting old women, people brutally assaulting old men, and nobody cares. People are brutally, they're chopping people's heads off and everything else. And they don't care. Why? Because the people who are doing it, or they're not the figures of government. Can't you see what's happening? Can you see what's happening? I don't play that game, ladies and gentlemen. I don't. I'm not fooled by that propaganda. People can sound sincere on the news, but remember, they're being paid big money for doing what they're doing. If they didn't bring in the ratings, they wouldn't be doing it. And the ratings, right? You get good ratings if enough drama is involved. When you see things like Lifetime go across a government desk, why would Lifetime be in a government document? Why Why would the Kardashians be in a government document? Why do some of these behavioral science reviews from the psychologists' Congress, why do they incorporate programming that's on cable television, cable and satellite TV? I'll tell you why. Because they're setting the atmosphere for the public. They're telling the public how to respond to things. They do this through reality shows. They teach people how to respond, knowing that people will emulate what they see. They're teaching people everything, and people do it exactly like these folks on television. It even happens in the church. Now, I'm not trying to offend anybody. I'm trying to get you to see this one small thing. Every comment that a person has that is not genuine sticks out like a sore thumb to me. I can always tell when somebody is emulating somebody else. And for the most part, in the church, people emulate one another. They copy each other. Where did we get that from? Where did we get that from? Because, listen, it's not like you realize it's happening. All of us do it. You can't say you quit. Everybody does it. Everybody emulates somebody in every given situation. Is part of the programming. It's part of the programming. It's part of what people do. Everybody does. If somebody on television, ladies, was wearing something nice and they felt real good, you're going to have that same sentiment saying, wow, if I get something close to it, I'm going to feel real good. If there's a person you like, you can't help but to borrow certain mannerisms from the individual and utilize them yourself. That just happens. That's the way we do. We emulate one another, right? Which means, as far as originality is concerned, we're so used to emulating people, we don't realize we also empower people at the same time. Because if a bunch of people start to emulate one individual, they empower that one individual. And inadvertently, they'll keep going back, feeding from that person's mannerisms. They will. It's part of the programming. And where do we get this from? Because that's how you're raised. You're raised to emulate what they tell you to emulate. When you're in school, they told you what was believable and what was not. When things are not believable, they also demonstrated ridicule and did indeed encourage it. So the government and these influential folks on television, right, or the government period, will tell you what is real and what is not. It's almost like a dictatorship, right, that you cannot see. A dictatorship you have a hard time putting your finger on, but indeed it's a dictatorship because everybody agrees upon the same system. God didn't give us a system. Man gave us a system, and we uphold something man built as though it was given to us by God. Isn't that something? That's the indoctrination. That's why it's illegal for a child not to go to school. It's part of being a citizen. You had to be fully indoctrinated here, right? And where pride, they know that people suffer with pride problems. Pride keeps it alive. To be proud of something is a message you'll hear every single day of your life. On the internet and on television. That's what they teach. In the church, you have a lot of people who teach people how to apply these programmed ways of the world to defeat spiritual issues, and their lives become miserable. Or to apply some worldly principle to their righteous life. That doesn't work either. I see that all the time. These worldly statements in spiritual conversations. I remember a few times saying, don't do that. Don't do that. Because then when I put the issue in check, anger came out of the people. People would get angry and upset. They would. But the truth is, I don't think they knew that they were doing it. It's something we do. When you're in an argument, when you were young, and you may not remember this, but when you were young in an argument, because most of you did listen to music, when you were in an argument with your peers, did you not borrow certain lines of a song to tell a person? Come on now, I know you remember. Did you not borrow the lyrics of music and songs to emulate what was in that song in a conversation to another person? Did you not do that? They set the precedent for how people cut their hair, how they dress. MTV did that. As soon as MTV came out, then how they dressed on television is how the kids dressed in school. Today, what they say is beautiful, you break your neck for and go get. You work yourself to the bone and go buy what they say is beautiful. If they say something is ugly, you do your best to hide it from everybody. If they say something is beautiful, you will spend all your time working so you can go and get it. I'm telling you, it's this program that's hard to break free of because you don't realize you're doing it. Till you're in the presence of an oddball. That's part of the programming. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a real war. Are you starting to see that? This is a real war. A real war.